Do you see any other Tesla-like companies emerging with a fantastic founder, a crazy big total addressable market, or a new trend now talked about openly? Are there any exciting companies? I know.
It sounds like you all want to give me the next. You want me to give you the next 100-bagger.
Well, actually, I'm just on a constant journey myself to explore. So that's the context.
Yeah, I mean, what's the next 100-bagger? Here's what I think. If there's a formula, I don't think there is one, but if there's a formula, I think you see what major problems are there out there in the world? Who's attempting to solve them? Could this solution actually work? Where's the next massive value creation going to happen? And then I think an important concept here is value creation versus value capture. So, companies will create a certain amount of value for society. It's like they're creating value. And then what the shareholders get, the revenue and all that is value capture. So you want to see a company that can create massive amounts of value and be able to capture some of it. And so that's really what you want to think about. What are some of the big problems that society faces and who's tackling that and who's going to maybe help solve them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the 100-bagger. There are 100-baggers out there. Is it more of a rare thing, right? To see a 100-bagger where you can get in as a publicly traded company and still do 100, X on a stock. With robotaxi and autonomous driving, it seems like, there could be potential to do another 10X, which would make it a 1,000-bagger. And it's something like in the early days, it just seems like it wasn't something that Elon was completely aware of. Let's say in 2012 or 2013, autonomous driving wasn't in the first master plan. Analysts didn't talk about it. Is that something that is kind of surprising at all to you, to see this whole new field of AI, machine learning, autonomous driving, robotaxis? Just curious of what your thoughts when you.
I think I covered. You asked what companies I covered. I also covered Mobileye back then. And Tesla had worked with them for a little bit. On the autonomous driving, they've been since acquired. But so I did cover the autonomous driving space. And I know advances in machine learning make all of that easier. I mean, my perception is that the ecosystem around Tesla, the analysts, the media, Twitter, talks more about autonomous than Tesla talks about autonomous. I mean, I know Tesla's excited about autonomous, and I know they talk about it, but I think their focus, I think they do want to get it working. And I don't want to speak for the company because I have not talked to anybody at Tesla in a while. So I'm not speaking for the company, but my perception is that, they're really focused on scaling their manufacturing. Yes, they want to get to full self-driving, but there's a lot of other things they have going on right now. They need to scale their manufacturing. They need to open up these new manufacturing centers in different parts of the world. They need to grow the Shanghai manufacturing. They're expanding into China. They're bringing new products to market. They're completely refreshing the S and the X. And that doesn't mean that full self-driving doesn't matter. And I think it is interesting, and it's this longer term thing that may change human behavior yet again. But my perception is that the ecosystem around Tesla talks more about full self-driving and autonomous than Tesla itself talks about it, which makes me think that I don't know if there's a disconnect there. I wonder sometimes if there's a disconnect there. There's an expectation that I guess I don't understand really what's getting baked into the expectations at this point on that topic.
I mean, a large part of it is Elon keeps on teasing full self-driving. He keeps on tweeting about it, how they're so close but isn't it to solving it.
I mean, look, I think in 2020, we've had a massive shift to remote work and hybrid work. So we're seeing this sort of redistribution of where work is done. So commuting itself is going to necessarily change. So then you combine that with sort of this automated driving and robo-taxi, and the world could be looking dramatically different in, even 3 years than it looks today. I think the world today looks different than it did 2 years ago in ways that not everybody would have predicted. The sheer amount of Zoom calls that we're doing, for instance. I think in 3 years, the world's going to look different again in ways that you can have high conviction that it's going to look really different, and have medium to low conviction in what exact ways it's going to be different.
I wanted to kind of segue into kind of some more of your just non-Tesla kind of personal thoughts and story. You tweeted a while back saying, "My personal impetus is to grind, outworking nearly everyone I knew. Probably came from being orphaned young. I was very hungry. Sometimes you can spin trauma into gold." I thought it's really interesting. I've had, a lot of kind of history with kind of orphans. I spent a good 4 years in Asia, just really like establishing very close relationships with orphans, and so that's really close to my heart. And I'm just really curious to hear like how do you connect kind of your past and how you've dealt with your past to make it to turn it to positive, as much as you want to go into it. But yeah, what can you share about that?
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, so this isn't something I talk about a ton, but I have tweeted about it, so it's totally fair game. Yeah, so I was placed into foster care as a little baby, and I was placed with a foster couple, like an older couple, retired couple. My dad served in World War II. My mother was a housewife. My mom was born in 1927. My dad was born in 1921. They had lived through the Great Depression. So here I was, this baby from in the 1980s, and I was placed with this old couple. And they ended up adopting me out of foster care. And so I had a wonderful childhood, and I was raised by not only my mom and her husband, but my aunts and uncles. And so there was this entire generation of elderly people who raised me. And sadly, over the course of my teenage years, every single one of them began to die off. And so I kind of lost everyone in a large way. And it was really horrible. So my parents died about a year apart. So I was orphaned at 13. I went to go live with some family members. But, I really think like I've been on my own emotionally since I was 13, and I've been on my own financially since I was 18. And that's hard. It's really hard. Like I think foster kids would tell you it's hard to age out of the foster care system. I think the reality of my life is that I have never had a financial safety net, as well as an emotional safety net. I was either going to, I don't want to say home. I was definitely, I could have ended up homeless, but here's what I would say. Having food insecurity and housing insecurity, I think, is under the bell curve of probability for every human. And it was probably closer to the more probable end of the bell curve for me than it would be for a lot of people with a more secure upbringing. So, I mean, I had a lot of motive and incentive to just work really hard to try to get out of that situation and make something of myself. And, now I have my own children. I mean, it's just going to be very different for them. So I'm proud of what I've done. It was not easy. I did it often at the expense of my own health. I don't think you climb out of those circumstances and not have scars to show for it. So I definitely have my scars, and I have had to do a lot of healing, personal healing. I don't want to paint a rosy picture because it was very hard. So I have a lot of empathy for people who've suffered trauma, who've had to go through deep, deep grief and healing, which I have. I feel very healed now, but it's been a long journey. And some of it's been simultaneous to my career. Those have been two journeys at the same time.
You shared another kind of story on Twitter a while back. You had some, was it cousins, I believe, who I guess a relative or a close relative passed away, and
cousin died. Yeah.
You weren't able to make it, but you're able to gift them some Tesla shares, and
Yeah.
you're just really hoping that that could be the beginning of generational wealth. So you do appreciate the democratization of wealth creation offered by the stock market. Relationships and health matter more, but money sure does help. How do you view relationships, health, and money? Like, can you have it all, or does it somehow, conflict? I mean, like, yeah, what's your kind of take on everything?
Yeah, so this was just me speaking on, behalf of myself, not my company or opinions or anything like that. But I do think having had different levels of personal access to financial resources, at some level, money really does help. It even helps your relationships. If you are expending a lot of brain power if you're at the grocery store, adding everything up and worrying about what you buy and trying to shop sales, like that's just a lot of energy, and it's a lot of mental bandwidth that like every poor person deals with. I've dealt with it. And I think people who have never been there don't understand. And that weighs on you. I mean, because you only have so much energy in a 24-hour period. And so the more you have to worry about money, the less mental bandwidth you have to deal with other things. I do think you get to a place in life, or at least if you can, and it'd be wonderful if everybody could get there, where there's a trade-off between time and money, where you realize that time is your more valuable commodity. At least that's been my journey. And then you're solving for time, because you do get to a point where you wouldn't even accept X amount more to work more. You would actually pay that to spend more time with your children or with your family, or to have good health, to be able to have a good night's sleep, stuff like that. I mean, obviously we're made to be relational humans. We're relational creatures. Our relationships matter so much to us. I think friendship is also just like a really amazing, like it's sometimes undervalued in Western cultures. I think that we tend to put a lot of weight on the marriage and the parent-child relationship, but like in our work relationships, like take a lot of primacy. But I think maintaining your friendships into old age is like super important. I think it's like super important to your well-being and health and wellness. So I think relationships matter a lot, obviously. I think this is obvious stuff. And then health, health is interesting because, some of it is just, the genetic lottery, and then some of it is lifestyle choice. And so how do you kind of maximize the genes that you were given, right? I think, what's the thing that the scientists and doctors say? It's your genes load the gun, your environment pulls the trigger. So I know even with myself, with my own health, just living a healthier lifestyle, reducing my stress, getting a good night's sleep has led to like dramatic improvements in my personal health.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes. Like I've gone through kind of my own journey of being really, really poor. There was a time like in my 20s where I had like less than a couple dollars in the bank, and actually I had almost nothing in it. I couldn't withdraw anything, and I didn't have money for lunch, so friends had to buy me lunch a lot, and I didn't have like a quarter to ride a bus. And I remember staying at the bus station, not having a quarter and not even owning enough to find a quarter, like really just being at the rock bottom. And then just walking away from the bus station, not to find a quarter, but because I just didn't have access to a quarter, like that type of like really just rock. I wouldn't say bottom. There's obviously, in a way, like money is relative. There's always probably going to be a worse off person. But for me at that time, that was like, a pit of despair. And when I reflect on it, though, it feels like it's opened up a world, a door of empathy, where I connect with so many people in the world through that type of experience, and I've also had a somewhat traumatic kind of childhood myself, being abused, etc. But that also opened up a different door of empathy, where it's like there's something about the other side of unfortunate pain or suffering or lack that seemed to open up doors of common human experience, or make us realize we're just all the same, in the same
Yes.
boat or something. And sometimes I struggle with this idea that, money could be it's like the end all, like it's going to solve all of your problems. When I see on one side, like it's tremendously valuable, like money, because like for those who don't have money, who are struggling, like day in and day out, it could be definitely a life changer, for a family, for a generation, etc. I can't understate that. But then on the other side, sometimes when our whole focus becomes just that, and we can get successful, sometimes that can bring us away perhaps from that common, I don't know, connection with those, from the places where we were before, do you ever think about stuff like that? Like just, the tension,
Yes. I think that there are some lessons that, I don't like to say only statements, that only can be learned through suffering. Maybe they can be learned in other ways. I think it's a lot harder to learn them. sort of had a moment a couple of years ago where for the first time I was thankful for my life experiences. And it was up to me to come to that, because if anyone else said to me, you need to be thankful, that was inappropriate. I have a mantra, grief before gratitude. Sometimes people need to grieve and they don't want you to put this toxic positivity on them. Like, people need to grieve. Like this last year with COVID, there's a lot, people have lost a lot. Like, we need to grieve before we're forced to be grateful. Once we fully grieved our losses, I think gratitude comes a lot more naturally. But I had this moment where I had a bunch of friends who, every single friend I had was going through something hard. And every single one of those friends was saying, this is the hardest thing I've ever been through. And they were all different things. And I had been through every single one of those things in my life. And I was like, how do I have this giant amount of rocks, these hard things? And like, this is the hardest thing you've ever been through. And that's like one of my 5, and it just, I'm laughing, but it was like, and I was just crying. And I remember realizing, like, I am so thankful I've had these experiences because I can relate to my friends and I can love them. And like, I also know I'm going to be okay. And that's been a tremendous gift.
Yeah. So sometimes I feel like getting through some of that hardship and what you kind of latch onto, whether it be the courage or the hope or the wisdom or people, relationships, the things that you learn and the person that you become oftentimes through the most hardships.
I think that in hindsight is very, very much true. I think that when someone's going through hell, sometimes there's not a silver lining in the moment. And even for years later, there's no silver lining. Some things that happen just really fucking suck. And it just sucks. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because I think sometimes we want to leapfrog to the silver lining. Oh yeah, you went through all this shit, but here's the silver lining. Like, no, I'm not grateful I lost my parents at age 12 and 13. I'm not grateful that I had my children. I had no mother there to help me. I'm not grateful that my mom is missing out on so much in my life. I will never be thankful for that. That's always going to be a loss for me. So I am grateful that I have a lot of empathy for grief. I think I understand grief in a big way. But I'm not grateful for my losses in an explicit sense. Maybe if that makes sense. I guess maybe I'm both. I'm grateful and not grateful. If that makes sense.
This is completely off topic probably, but yeah, the way I try to make sense of it too is like, trauma, abuse, suffering, like that stuff. I'm definitely like I don't see much positive in those things. But what I am grateful about is somehow in the bigger picture, in the process, somehow I was fortunate to be connected with enough courage, with enough wisdom, with enough somehow, guidance, somehow where I was able to overcome and process and to, come out the other end. And that's kind of what I'm grateful. And the person that, I've been able to become through that process, so it's kind of, definitely don't wish any of that suffering on anyone. But
I'm sure it informs you as a parent as well. And right? And how you show up as a human in the world.
Yeah, no, I'm so thankful because like it opens my heart to, just to everyone, and it's changed my life, as a parent, to completely embrace, my kids as precious and valuable as they are. What about SpaceX? So I noticed your tweets. Sometimes you're like, I can't stop crying watching a SpaceX launch. Like, what's going on? Like, is it sadness or is happiness? Excitement?
I know it's so funny. I cry tears of joy all the time. So I'm like very in touch with my like tears of joy. Like I am actually very poignantly moved by great acts of humanity. Like it just, I mean, I just feel it so much. I think because I sometimes see the connectedness of all things. So when you watch a SpaceX launch, there's so much meaning in it. It's humanity like pushing forward in spite of it all. But then it's also like the work of team and the work of a visionary leader and there's so much that it takes to bring it together for that one launch. And so all of that, the blood, sweat, and tears that it took to get to that moment, like I see that in that moment of the launch. And then when I think about how, people said like it couldn't be done, you couldn't land the rockets. They told Elon it couldn't be done, and now they're doing it. Just that absolute defiance of it can't be done. It's like, well, I'm going to do it, and the fact that there's so many people who made it didn't do it. Like it just blows me away. And I just feel so happy. And so it really is tears of joy, but also tears of just being moved. I'm just so moved by the humanity of it. And I love when SpaceX produces things and they produce it and their production quality is really good. So you get to just watch at home and feel like you're part of it. And it's really exciting. And they'll cut to the room, to the command center, and all the employees are cheering. And when you just see the looks on their faces, I'm just like so happy for them. And so, yeah, it's very emotional. Do you get emotional watching the SpaceX launches?
I get excited about like the launches. I showed my kids, and they're super excited. When I get emotional, like the time I got emotional was when Tesla was accepted or made it into the S&P 500. Like something about that, it is similar to what you're talking about, where it's just years and years of the doubt and the naysayers and the haters saying like, you can't do it, it's impossible. And just all of the resistance against, like here's a person in a company just trying to do good. They're trying to contribute in a very significant way for the future of humanity and our world, and they get so much slack for it. It's just endless pain over and over. People saying you can't do it, and then people betting against them, trying to make their life hard. And you see this year in, year out, and then finally, like the story changes. Now the masses, the public has to accept, the reality that this company and the founder has defied all odds and has done what almost everyone thought was impossible, but did something that was noble in a sense, like for the greater good of humanity, right? And that type of story is just like, I think it's lost sometimes, where we think it's just a company or it's just a stock or it's just cars or something. But I think what you're touching on with SpaceX is, no, this is actually a bigger, something bigger is happening here. This isn't just, people trying to launch a rocket, but they're trying to do something so big, so grand. And it's for humanity. And these people and the team and all the workers are just pouring out all of their energy, all of their creativity into this thing, all dependent on whether or not this rocket is going to make it or not. All eyes focused on that, and it's this super significant event that, it's emotional. Yeah, it's amazing. So you've also tweeted and shared about this concept of kind of non-dualism, non-binary, kind of both and third path thinking. So a path that reconciles seemingly opposing viewpoints. So it seems like something that you really hold on to, you find value in, you think that's useful. Can you explain kind of what this non-binary kind of thinking is and how it's been helpful for you?
I think it's helpful in all walks of life. I also think there's truth in non-dualism. I think in order for something to be true, it has to hold its opposites. It's more inclusive of all types of people, I feel like. I don't think the world is as black and white as we want to paint it. And there's so many examples of that. I think I tweeted about my current company. I used to study the firearms industry. I got to know a lot of folks in the firearms industry. The Second Amendment right to own firearms. There's this big debate, and so much of the debate is we need more guns, we need fewer guns, more guns, fewer guns. And I actually remember feeling kind of helpless, like, where's the path forward? Like these things are pointing in opposite directions. And so, now I work for the company that makes the taser, and the whole idea is, no, let's have less lethal weapons. So, the whole idea is, our CEO and founder, two of his friends were killed in a road rage incident. and by guns. And his whole thing was like, well, why is it when we want to stop someone from coming at us, the only tool we have is to put a metal ball through that person? Could killing be a technology problem? And I think ultimately it's a problem of the human heart in some ways. But like even, in some cases, really, it's, if you look at when lethal force might be justified in a certain situation, there's not a good enough tool. Similar with our military checkpoints in other countries, and somebody's coming at the military checkpoint, and the only tool you have, you don't know if this person is a suicide bomber or they're just, just a mom asking for help. And so, but your only tool to deal with a potential threat is a firearm. And so it's not the best tool for every situation, right? And so I thought the taser device was like this, it was like this great, like third path thinking, like, we're not even going to have this debate. And the third path sort of reconciles the two, which is like, well, maybe if we stop arguing about this and we could all agree on like this, and that's one example. I think I've used Tesla as another example about, with the internal combustion engine, you've got, emissions versus performance, right? And so it's like you either pollute more, and you have performance, the car performs better, or you pollute less and the car doesn't perform. Well, like, this is this horrible trade-off. Like, what if we can just reconcile this and you can have more performance and zero emissions? It's like Model S Plaid, and so so those are product examples. But I think even in our personal lives, I think I tweeted about I wanted to nurse my babies. I also have a career that involves a lot of travel. And this was this binary. And then I was like, no, I'm going to bring the baby on all my trips. I want both. And I want to nurse and I want the job with all the travel. Okay. So I'm going to travel with my infant. And I know that's a very privileged thing to say, but everything, you think of something where things seem, if you even think of anything now, David, where two things are pointing against each other, is there an idea that reconciles both points of view?
Yeah. Actually, I think about stuff like this all the time. So artificial general intelligence or singularity, this seems like in some ways, if you look at it from a black and white, binary approach, this is either a huge problem, where, singularity can ultimately wipe out or be very destructive, devastating to the human race. Or other people take the flip side, right? And they say, hey, this is going to be fantastic for humanity and open up tons of productivity and free time, and we'll reap the benefits of artificial general intelligence. And it seems so divided. Do you have any ideas on how this stuff can be reconciled?
So what's the both and there? That it's a giant risk to humanity and also potential benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you another example. So, there's with technology, you have a lot of optimists, who come from tech type of backgrounds, et cetera, saying, oh, technology is the answer. But on the flip side, you could look at it and say, well, is technology really making things better? Is it improving the wealth gap? Is it really making societies more stable? Is it helping democracy? You can look at certain societies and you say, hey, they're using technology against their own citizens by tracking, surveilling, collecting data. And you can look at some of the stuff and you go, wait a minute, where is this headed? Are we headed into a world where, the government has all this power to track, surveil, our human rights and liberties are put, are in threat. And this could be kind of either or, kind of binary approach too. Like, how do you?
Exactly. So exactly. So that's thank you for coming up with an example. So if a certain technology helps humanity, but there's a potential for its misuse, should we argue that it shouldn't exist? What's the third path? What's the both and path? Maybe the both and path acknowledges that there's a benefit to humanity here, acknowledges that there's a potential for misuse. And what's the reconciling third path? I think the reconciling third path is ethical design. Now, who mandates that? I mean, that's another thing. I mean, I think sometimes collectively we need to sort of agree on certain things. My company now has an ethics board, and it's independent, and it has a lot of thought leaders and constitutional scholars on it, which I think is really interesting. We get good guidance from people who aren't ourselves. But ethical design, in places where people really care about that, is a reconciling third path, because wouldn't it be great if you could have the benefit to humanity and then minimize the, the potential for abuse and misuse? Then the technology still gets to exist and you get the benefit and you mitigate the downside. But I do see so many arguments just end up so binary. It's just like, this should exist. No, it shouldn't. Yes, it should. No, it shouldn't. It's like, well, why can't we just agree that like both of you guys are making really good points and find the third path that reconciles the first two?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I try to do all the time also, like, I think a lot of times people think there's only one side, like, for example, it's either good or bad. Like, is technology good or bad? Is AI good or bad? But a lot of times it could be mixed. There's a lot of different, pros and cons. I mean, you talk about ethical design, but then, so there's this other angle where it's like, well, are all countries in the world really going to abide by some type of ethical design guidelines or standard when this gives immense power to become, perhaps a hegemony or just, a world leader if using AI in an uncontrolled manner. And it's an incredible weapon, and you go back to kind of, you mentioned kind of, maybe there's a human heart problem, maybe there's something deeper beyond just the technology issues. Like how can we expect technology to solve all of our problems when,
we are flawed beings?
Yeah, like if you look at the history of the world, thousands and thousands of years, what is the history of the world? I mean, if it shows anything.
That's a both and too, though, right? Because you look at
exactly.
You just talk about SpaceX, and and then you've also got like wars and slavery.
Exactly.
Right? It's like, and human trafficking, which still exists today in a really big way. It's like humans are both awesome and also do evil things.
Exactly. The history of humanity is you have immense, horrible things that humans have done every generation. Like it's a constant theme, wars and killings and just the unspeakable. And this happens across cultures, across time, across, periods. Yet on the flip side, you have amazing progress. You have amazing ingenuity, the creativity, the bringing together of human just mind and forces, to improve life, and to make immense, strides in that field. And it seems like in some ways, it's not complementary. It's not, it doesn't mix, but in some ways, like one of the analogies I like to say is sometimes I think things are two sides of the same river, where it's like some things you just can't reconcile. They're so different, it feels like. And sometimes I just get to this place where it's like, I can't reconcile certain things because they're so opposite. And when I put them together, they don't match. But yet I have a sense, I'm confident they're actually two sides of the river. Like I need both sides to understand, or like the truth of the river lies in having both sides. And if I try to reconcile both sides and I'm not able to, and I just pick one side, then that's not going to be like the accurate picture, right? And so I think in terms of history, in some ways, it is two sides of this one river of human history. You have immense, just, crazy evils, but then you have immense creativity and the goodness of people too, right? And in some ways, they don't seem to be reconcilable unless you kind of are okay with letting them be as they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
whenever and I love these kinds of conversations. It's like what I do all the time. I love it.
Nice.
I think for me, it always comes back to, okay, like, because I'll get a little overwhelmed, like the problems of the world are so big and, what are we going to do? And then I go, okay, what is my locus of control? Here are the areas where I have control over my life, my family, my company, my world. I mean, I think there's actually a lot of truth to that, because, you're not going to solve the fact, or, I personally am not going to solve the fact that somebody in another country might use a technology for ill. And Elon, this is something that concerns him, right? He's tweeted about this, about the singularity with the AI. So I'm glad there's folks who are worried about it and want to, force sort of international agreements on, ethical design. And I think ultimately sometimes it just comes back to, what's in my locus of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I resonate a lot with your non-binary thinking, with the third path. And a lot of times the best solutions are, rather than optimize something that's suboptimal, like sometimes there is a real solution out there that actually can really nail the thing on the head. And sometimes we're just not open to it, because we're so boxed into either or into kind of a narrow mindset rather than seeing kind of all angles of a problem and really just being free in our kind of thinking and trial and error.
Yeah. Thanks. I think so many of the world's religions have branches that are non-dual. I think that there's a reason why so many things come back to it. It just seems like to be a recurring theme in multiple aspects of life. And it's interesting too, because it is applicable in business. Not everything is zero sum. Some things are, but not everything is zero sum. And it's better if we can find the non-zero sum answer. What's the business jargon term? Win-win.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a win-win situation.
Yeah. Just wanted to thank you again for just taking the time to generously share your experiences, your past, your thoughts. I'm sure everyone watching, has benefited.
Well, I just thank you. And thank you for doing that interview in 2016. I have to say the community around Tesla is so supportive and affirming. That's new for me. Way back when, I feel like I got way more criticism and sort of hateful comments toward me prior to 2016. And so, you're part of that amazing community. It's really affirming and supportive. I think the world needs more of that. So I just want to thank everybody. People are really awesome and sweet, and I'm just blown away by some of the kind comments I've seen on Twitter. It's just really special. So thank you.